The DEUS network is a networking platform looking to exchange ideas across the pond. Excuse me. Just needed to turn off the background noise on my own computer. Sorry. Is a platform for exchanging ideas across the pond, so from Germany and the US, on various topics. And starting with this year, we have developed a webinar series on the topic of area-wide planning, looking at it from different perspectives and different disciplines. I can mention really briefly, we've had 2 webinar series already, one on the sustainable reuse of buildings and structures, as well as one webinar on the use of geographic information systems, otherwise known as GIS, and other tools. You can find a recording of these webinars on our website as well, and I'll post that link in the chat shortly. All of these webinars which we are hosting, we're looking to gather input for a position paper, which will look to combine all these different aspects and ideas on area-wide planning. And we look to develop that position paper by the end of this year in the DEUS.net core group. So turning to today's session, we now have the exciting topic of community engagement for area-wide planning. And we have input both from the American side and from the German side. I will be moderating for the German input, which we'll get to briefly, as well as my colleague from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Amy Storm, will be responsible for introducing the U.S. speakers, as well as their moderating their session. I can see your picture now. Perfect. Hello, Amy. So, without further ado, let us get into the German content for today. I would like to introduce briefly Stefan Heinig, who is a freelance planner from the City of Leipzig, currently living there, and he was previously, in his previous role, the director of the city planning department of the City of Leipzig. And due to this professional experience that he brings, he has a plethora of experience in the area of community engagement and, yeah, general integrated urban planning. It is one of his specialties, which I've come to know throughout the last year of collaboration with him on projects. And without further ado, I would like to give the stage over to you, Stefan. You can start to share your screen. And a note to all of our participants, you have the ability to write any questions you might have in the chat, and we'll look to pick those up after the presentation. So, Stefan, please, the floor is yours. And we can see exactly the presentation fine. Thank you. You're still on mute, Stefan. You have to unmute yourself. Thank you. Sometimes it helps to
unmute first and then to share the screen.
Exactly. We can hear you fine now, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Carl, and good morning to the American colleagues. Good afternoon to the German ones. Thank you for the invitation. I want to tell you a little bit about my experience on integrated urban development and the role of public participation and engagement, with the special focus on the City of Leipzig. But first of all, I want to give you some insights about the understanding of integrated urban development in Germany. Then I tell a little bit about my experience to deal with this in the City of Leipzig. And at the end, I have 2 examples of urban co-production projects in Leipzig. Let's start with the overview. Cities have to deal with many challenges at the moment in German cities, maybe it's the topic of refugees from the Ukraine and to integrate them in the housing market and the job market, but also the climate change, the change of mobility, topics of housing policy, social cohesion, education, public funding, and so on and so on. In this situation, city needs much expert knowledge on the one hand side, but I see that often you can develop good solutions only in a cross-sectoral, cross-silo approach, in an integrated approach, also involving the ideas of the local people. That's the idea of the so-called Leipzig Charta for Sustainable Urban Development. Leipzig Charta was adopted by the European ministers in 2007 and updated in 2021. And you can see here an overview over the content of the Leipzig Charta. And I will especially focus on the left-hand side, the 5 key principles of good urban governance. That means, on the one hand side, to do an urban policy for the common goods, for the quality of life for the local people. And the second principle is to do that in an integrated, in a cross-sectoral approach inside the administration, inside the discussions of the sectoral, to bind the sectoral discussions. The third one, to do this also in a participation process and a co-creation process. Use the input and the chances of the local people in this process to create ideas and also to implement ideas for urban development. And the fourth one is the multi-level governance. That means the governance between the local level, the state level, and the federal level, and to bring these levels together to programs that are developed on the federal side or the national side, but also implemented in the local level. And last but not least, important is to work on a place-based approach to develop solutions on that local level that are the best for the solution. That can be, you see it on the right-hand side, the neighborhood, that can be the entire city, but it can be also in functional and regional area. And to bring these all together is the idea of the Leipzig Charta in 3 topics: the just city, the green city, and the productive city. So in Germany, the Leipzig Charta is the input for then the so-called national urban policies. The federal level wants to support urban development on the local level in 3 fields of action. One field is the good practice, the founding programs of the federal level for urban development that we have in Germany, orientated on the Leipzig Charta. The second one are a special project series for cities and urbanity. There, the federal level is founding innovative new solutions in the municipalities for the current challenges. And cities should do that in a cross-sectoral approach together with other stakeholders and in an innovative way. And you can see on the right-hand side all the cities and projects that were founded in these programs in the last, now I think 15 years. And third field of action is the platform for exchange and transfer of knowledge. That is on the one hand side, of course, a platform in the internet, but on the other side, it's also a yearly large congress on urban development to meet other stakeholders and to discuss new solutions. On the local level, the Leipzig Charter is especially implemented by the connection between the formal planning instruments. You can see that on the left-hand side. That means the land use plan, the legally binding land use plan, combined it with a strategic or informal planning level on the right-hand side. And a steering process, we call it urban development management. That means the strategic level is mostly a voluntary plan or different voluntary plans and processes prepared by different levels of participation. The plans were approved by the city council and are basis for decisions and also for the application for the national and European fundings also of the national urban policies. And important is that it is not a typical plan, but it's a steering process of urban development on the level of on the basis of such a concept. And this steering process needs, on the one hand side, a good product, a professional merging process of specialist planning, of strategic process, of forms of spatial planning. And on the other hand, you need also a process in your municipality, a process inside the city administration where the different departments work together on cross-sectoral solutions. And on the one hand side, on the other side, participation process, participation structures outside the city administration for civil participation and involvement. And last but not least, it's very important to have political leadership in this process. And part of this approach is also another way of communication from the city administration with institutions and stakeholders. At the moment, in most cases, you see it like on the left image, the city hall is in the center of the communication and communicates in the participation process with developers, with schools, with NGOs, with social services, with house owners, with economical stakeholders, and so on. But it's necessary to change this process to a network process. You can see on the right-hand side where City Hall is a part of a network of all these stakeholders. And maybe it's a vision for the future in many municipalities. But my point of view, there are more and more good examples for this understanding of co-creative urban development processes. So far to, I would say, to the theory of the approach. And now I want to come to Leipzig and look a little bit on the Leipzig situation. I think most of you don't know really Leipzig. Leipzig is a city in Eastern Germany in the former GDR, about 180 kilometers south of Berlin. But today, 32 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it's a city in the middle of Europe. And it's very interesting in the development of the last 30 years that in the 1990s, Leipzig lost more than 85% of its industrial jobs after reunification, and it's lost more than 20% of the inhabitants. But it changed this development, and today is Leipzig the fastest growing large city of Germany with more than 620,000 inhabitants. But you can, I think you can compare the situation in the 1990s also with the situation with many cities in the United States, in the Rust Belt, where many industrial jobs were lost and a transformation process started. If we look a little bit deeper in this time and connect this also with strategies of urban development, you can see 3 phases of urban development in the last 30 years. At the one hand side, you had the 1990s. I told you about this loss of employment, of the loss of inhabitants, and also the vacancy rate in the housing sector rised up to 20%. And on the other hand, there were many investments in the city in this time, and the strategy of the city was to develop the city with large infrastructural projects. The new airport, the new fair, the connection with the motorway system and the international rail system were very important for the development we got later on. Then we had the time of the 2000s, where we had to deal with this shrinking process, with the vacancy rate. And it was a process of urban restructuring on the one hand side. And on the other hand side, unused space got used for urban green or for innovative projects, for projects together with stakeholders, with innovative stakeholders, with civic society and so on. And it was also a time of successful new economic development. On the one hand side, in the automotive sector, but also in the creative industries, they use the unused space and come to Leipzig. Entrepreneurs develop new projects. The biotechnology sector came to Leipzig. And that was the time we started with this integrated urban development process with strategic planning and put the basis for the situation today, where we have a strong process, a reurbanization process, and settled system of an integrated urban development. Part of this integrated urban development, or basis of this integrated urban development today, is the so-called integrated urban development concept. In Germany, we say INSEC or ISEC. It's the short form for this concept. And you can see here the map from this ISEC, where we have focus areas of urban development. Focus areas you can see in red or green that have a function for the entire city and for the region, for the quality of life and for the employment. Focus areas you can see in pink, which are focus areas of the growth and in the new developments, not outside and out in the outskirts of the city, but in reusing brownfields in the inner city for developing new housing estates and economical estates inside the inner city. And you can see the blue areas that are focus areas of an integrated approach in the private neighborhoods. And part of this focus area strategy is also that we have in these focus areas district managements that involve the local people in the development process, that we use founding programs of the federal level for this development process, and of course that we try to involve civic engagement in these development processes. And we do this not only on this level of the focus areas, but we also have established on the citywide level a culture of participation with under the umbrella of Leipzig Weiterdenken, Leipzig Thinking Ahead. That's a structure inside the city administrations, which has the task to develop innovative participation and engagement processes for relevant topics of urban development. but also do a continuous communication of these processes, but also work inside the administration for coaching and training of administration in participation and engagement processes, and provide infrastructure for these processes, so that not each department have to hold all the equipment and all the know-how for these processes, but can get support by a Leipzig thinking head. So that's the overview of the strategic approach in the city of Leipzig, and I want to share with you now two practical examples of co-production where I also be involved. The first example is the so-called Bürgerbahnhof Plagwitz, citizen station of Leipzig Plagwitz. It's a former cargo railway station in one of these focus areas in Leipzig West, and you have a large brownfield on this area. And at the beginning of the 2000s, the discussion started: what are the perspectives of this area? What can we develop there? And we started for this area a co-productive process with the with local stakeholders, and this process were very successful. It won local federal prize for urban green, for new urban green in the city, and was also nominated for a European prize, the Regio Star. There's also a video on YouTube with English subtitles about this project from this Regio Star Awards. You see this area on the right-hand side. This area is involved in a district of housing, but also of economic estates, and has three parts. One part is also an area for a commercial development. It's the smallest area of the Bürgerbahnhof. Then you have a second area for citizens projects. This is this entire area here. And the south area, it's the development of a so-called urban forest. Urban forest means that there were planted many trees to get a dense area of trees, like a forest in an inner city context. So that you also develop the ecological functions in this area. And the development was together with the local stakeholders from the beginning, from the development of the ideas until the implementation of the processes, and also in the situation now where all projects are finished and you have to maintain the entire area. We can have a look on this green space for the citizens project. We have many different projects, from, of course, a large green space for recreation, but also an area of urban gardening. One part for eatable city, that means a food garden where people can harvest fruits in the public space. So it also has a playing field for ball sports, bouldering, rock, an area for scout park, a construction playground where kids can work with wood and construct different new things. You have also graffiti wall, water fountain, and also a small observation tower where you have a view over the entire area. And last but not least, also a citizens project is a citizens coffee in this area as a communication and meeting point. that all were established during the last 10-15 years, and today we have also a co-productive structure to maintain and develop this area in the next years. And you can see the structure behind the projects in this slide. You see on the right-hand side the City of Leipzig as the landlord. Of course, the City Council do there the public decisions. And you have a non-profit organization, the Stiftung Eckenwecken, that is the tenant of the area, and there you have the reconciliation of the interests, but also the economic risk of the maintenance of the area. On the other hand side, you have the user groups. They rent the sites by the Stiftung Eckenwecken and develop their public usable projects, and have together a user council. One member of each user group and the Stiftung Eckenwecken are part of this user council, as part of self-government of this Bürgerbahnhof, and they are in charge of preservation, maintenance, and also development of the projects in the site. And you also have a neighborhood council that is for consultation for important decisions that are relevant for the entire neighborhood, and it's also a mediator if you have conflicts. And from this Bürgerbahnhof, the Stiftung Eckenwecken developed a second project. It's called We in the Neighborhood. In Germany, in the short term, we say WIG, Wir im Quartier. We in the Neighborhood is a structure for creating co-productive urban development in a larger area, in a larger district. If people have an idea what they want to change in their neighborhood, they can contact we in the neighborhood, and they are a so-called support team that supports and help to create, to develop this idea to a real project. And then they bring together this idea in a steering team. In the steering team, you have people from this civic society, from the city administration, and also from the city council. And they decide if they can support this project and bring the connection to the city administration and the solutions that you need there. And if they decide that this is a good project for the neighborhood and you should develop this project, then the work of the project can start it. You can find other stakeholders, other people in the area to work in a solution team of the solution and realize your own projects. That's a structure to realize citizens project in a neighborhood and to bind in the city administration on the one hand side and also the city council on the other hand side. I have one example for you. It's the project Leipzig waters its plants. You have many trees in Leipzig that have not much enough water in the summertime because of climate change. Summers were more and more dry, and some people had the idea we should use public engagement to water these trees. But the question is, how do I know which tree needs water, which tree is watered, and how can I find a systemical approach? And these people contacted WIG and the support team, and WIG brought the contact to the administration, to the Department of Urban Green, that find a solution that works together with the public watering processes, and they also brought the contact to the technology foundation in Berlin. They have developed a similar project in Berlin, and now they adapted this Berlin project, the Berlin watering app, to Leipzig together with a local stakeholder, the Open Knowledge Lab Leipzig. And so the structure of WIC helped with this or supported the project with this contacts, and also with blogs and newsletters, with networking. And after less than 1 year, the project could start. They had developed the Leipzig app, Leipzig East, and with the beginning summer, the engagement process for watering the trees could start. And if we see now the situation we have in this larger context, we in the neighborhood, 22 solution teams. I show you here some examples, what are topics the solution teams work on, from the neighborhood care over parklets, tiny living in an inner city context, until meeting places in the gardens of local inhabitants. You have a broad range of civic engagement project, and you have the supporting structure of we in the neighborhood. So that brings me to the end. I hope I could show you a short overview how integrated urban development can work in a city in Germany, and can involve civic engagement for sustainable development in these urban development processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. That was extremely exciting, especially for me. I felt like I learned a lot from the strategic view all the way down to the practical application in Leipzig. We have a number of questions in the chat. I would just like to, yeah, let's start with those questions, Ashley. So Anne Carroll was asking, is Leipzig considered a best practice model for other cities in Germany regarding community engagement? What is your opinion on that?
I think you have in every city best practice and worst practice. And of course, I showed you some of the good practice, I would say. And I think in the last 2 years, I started to work more over Germany in other areas, also in the Rhine-Main region and so on. And what I can see there, I would say Leipzig is a best practice model for co-production processes. And for an openness of the city council and also the administration to involve this civic engagement in urban development processes. I think so, yes.
Maybe a follow-up question from my side now. What do you think that Leipzig had an advantage because of the brownfields and the vacant space in the city, especially around the 1990s?
I think there are two things. I would look a little bit more to the past, because I think it's important that Leipzig was in every time a city of the citizens and not a government place. Yes, and also in the beginning of the 20th century, the people of Leipzig developed many projects for the city, and that also was a reason why the peaceful revolution started in Leipzig, in my mind. So civic engagement is typical for Leipzig, and the situation in the 1990s with the brownfields with large empty space helped us to develop and to let grow the civic engagement in these areas. But also at this time, you need an openness. You have other East German cities in the same situation that couldn't develop such an civic engagement process. But for Leipzig, it was very important to do this urban regeneration process of the 1990s together with the people in the city, and to be open for new ideas and to try new projects and also to fail. I think that's an important thing, that you also can fail with projects.
Okay, yeah, thank you for putting that in the historical and cultural context as well. We have a specific question from Rihanna regarding the Bürgerbahnhof project, the citizen station project. Are the citizen projects temporary, permanent, or a combination?
Most projects are permanent, but maybe the group of people that maintain the project is dying, then also the project can dying and a new project can be developed. So you have, of course, changes in the process, but the Bürgerbahnhof is a permanent project or permanent area, also with permanent projects.
Perfect. I believe that also answers Amy's question about if one nonprofit manages the projects. Basically, it's a mixture, as you said. Some come new to the scene, some stay for a while, and
but you have one nonprofit which is the mediator between city administration and the projects. And I think that's in key for the development, that not many different project stakeholders have to deal with in city administration, but you have this Stiftung Eckenwecken as a mediator and moderator in this process.
okay. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. The role of the mediator is important in this project as well, between the projects themselves, the citizen projects, and the city. A further question is, does the city own the entire site, or did they parcel it out to separate users?
The city owns the entire site of the citizens project and of the urban forest, but not of the commercial space. That's in the ownership, or was long time in the ownership of a daughter of the German railway. And now I think they sold it to a private investor.
Mm-hmm. And turning our attention now to the WIC project, the Wir im Quartier, the WIQ, if I can say it so. How, or would you have an answer as to how the committee are selected themselves? What is the process? Or sorry, the members who are part of the committee, how is that process designed?
Which committee? You have three committees in this WIC project: the solution team, the support team, and the decision team. What do you mean?
I would pose the question to Amy at this point. Amy, if you would care to elaborate on your question.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering, right, just mostly for the decisions that are made about which projects get to go forward, who gets to make those decisions? And so, yeah, how is the committee chosen?
The committee were developed by the Stiftung Eckenwecken, and you have this core team of the organization, which is part of the committee, and then they ask the city council and they ask the city administration to send people to this committee. So it was the decision of the city council and the decision of the city administration which stakeholders go in this committee?
Okay, I believe that answers the question. Maybe just one final question from my side, and then we'll go to the American presenters for today. The WIC, W-I-Q projects, it seems to me like the structure allows for the diversity of the community to come out. And by diversity, I mean the different interest of the different stakeholders, be it environmentalists, be it economic focused, and so forth. Would you agree with that, yeah, comment from my side with your background in the project?
Yes, I would agree. I think it's a great chance to bring different interests together in such a development process of a larger district. And I think that's one of the strengths of the structure, that also with a changing community, new interests can be involved and new solutions can be developed with new stakeholders.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Stefan, for your time and the very interesting presentation. Regarding the presentation slides, whether we make them available or not, we'll clarify after the webinar, and we'll look to provide that information on our website as well for all to see. So thank you very much, Stefan. And
thank you very much.
With that, I would like to give the stage over to Amy Storm from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to introduce our American speakers today. Amy, please.
Yes, thank you, Carl, and thank you, Stefan. Hi, everyone. Really pleased that we get to be part of this session. And next up, we're going to hear from Ramon and Drew, and they are going to talk with us about what's been happening in the city of Fresno in California. But before I do introductions, I just wanted to say, Stefan, that was really interesting. And I know I'll have several follow-up questions for you. It's really exciting to see the different ways that the community is engaged and able to move on some of the projects that they're most interested in. So thank you for sharing that with us today. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Ramon and Drew. So Ramon is the Neighborhood Development Director from Every Neighborhood Partnership. This is an organization that uses civic engagement, capacity building, health advocacy, and community revitalization to help address social issues and disparities in vulnerable communities, particularly in Fresno's South neighborhoods. And Ramon is working with Drew Wilson from the City of Fresno, California. And Drew is the supervising planner for the City of Fresno, and he runs the city's brownfields program. And I didn't introduce myself, but I am Amy Storm. I work at the Environmental Protection Agency and our headquarters Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization. We are completely interested in all the different ways that communities are able to clean up and safely reuse brownfields to support community development, community priorities, community goals. And the community engagement piece is really one of the most exciting aspects of that. So without further ado, I know Drew and Ramon are going to, they have a joint slideshow and they're going to share the presentation time. And I invite all of you listening to please put some questions in the chat as they come to you, and we'll have time to discuss them. So Drew and Ramon, welcome, and please pull up your slides. Okay, I can see them. That looks really good.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Drew. Yeah, thanks, Amy, for the introduction. kind words. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone from Germany, everyone else attending internationally. It's our pleasure to be in this space to share with you some best practices, what we're doing here locally in the city of Fresno and California and the States. Next slide. So we're hoping to cover in this next 30 minutes some foundational thinking around the theory of change and how we look at neighborhoods, how we value community voice and their role in shaping policy, shaping the land use, shaping the planning from the community side, from the city side. I'm going to be sharing with you all on how we approach the community at large, whether they're small or large, and define neighborhoods and how we engage them in our processes. Secondly, we will also demonstrate with you all some best practices from some case studies, local studies here in the city of Fresno. We will first dive into a local model that's been temporary, so a low to moderate, and then we'll get into some area-wide planning, which is a little more robust. And then we'll also share a little bit about our unique coalition here in Fresno, which is a collective of CBOs, community-based organizations, institutions, and how we have been able to leverage resources, thought partners in the strategic planning of our city to help revitalize communities who are the most vulnerable and impacted by contaminated land areas here in the city. And then we'll close with some lasting thoughts on some lessons learned from our case studies and from our perspectives of COVID, as we all probably, most of all in the world has been impacted by COVID. How does that impact our community engagement? What are some lessons we've learned along that way to help think through a next pandemic or think through how we can best leverage what we have now? So happy to share with you all some best practices at the tail end. All right, so setting the foundation. Next slide, Drew. The foundation is really important on community engagement. So I'll be sharing with you all ABCD, which is an acronym for Asset-Based Community Development, and how it's a vision and how we look at neighborhoods. It's a new way of looking at communities that have been impacted by disinvestment and existing disparities and challenges. Next slide. Here's a brief description of asset-based community development. It's a strategy for sustainable communities-driven development beyond the mobilization of a particular community. ABCD is concerned with how to think micro assets to how to link micro assets to the macro environment. The appeal of ABCD lies in its premise that communities can drive the development process themselves by identifying and mobilizing existing but often unrecognizable assets and thereby responding and creating local economic opportunity. Next slide. In a nutshell, right? ABCD is founded on 3 basic principles. Build on what we have. So think about the existing land uses, right, for redevelopment. It is place-based. So what this means, it's centralizes on defined geographies in your city. We're not doing a shotgun approach, the whole macro side of a city, but more of defined pockets of a neighborhood. It's relationship driven, so people are the answer. And we'll get into this later, how that's a very key component to any community engagement that's done well and effective is based on relationships. Next slide. A half full and half empty perspective. So in this framework and this theory of change, an ABCD approach says we recognize that there is deficits in the community, in these neighborhoods, in the city. While we will not focus on a half-empty approach, we look at it as a half-full opportunity. So, for example, if there's vacant lands, we look at that as opportunities for redevelopment. If there's pockets of vacant parcels, we look at it as an opportunity for housing development or a pocket park or a plaza. So we are moving away from a deficit mindset by looking with new glasses into communities with a half full approach. Next slide. Here's I think for me and from a CBO side of as a stakeholder, for us, this is a really foundational way of approaching the work. Traditionally, you have two different models. We would say there's a social services model and there's an ABCD model. An ABCD model focuses on assets, the strengths of a neighborhood or a community, versus focusing only and solely on the needs or deficits. An ABCD approach also focuses on investment rather than charity. So we're going to invest our resources, our time, our energy, our expertise in communities rather than just handing out services or providing programs in a neighborhood or in a city. Also, another strength to an ABCD approach is that the people are the answer. Sounds so easy, right? But oftentimes in a traditional approach, programs are the answer. Also, lastly but not least, residents are the answer versus residents are clients. And we'll get into it on the next slide. So this is what we call a community spectrum, a power ladder of resident empowerment. While we acknowledge that residents may start at the bottom of this spectrum as recipients of programs, ABCD aspiration helps to move them upward. So there's upward mobility for their growth in community to become champions. So we start with the bottom level of acknowledging, recognizing, identifying residents as clients in these communities that they live in, and we hope to move them upward to more of a foundational focus group, folks who can chime in, give feedback. Then we invite them to the next stage of participation. So they're participating with us in planning, in projects, with the ultimate goal of they becoming control of the planning process themselves. In this process, they are now moving away from just recipients, folks who give feedback, to now owning the process and what that looks like. In that latter stage, this is the most work we've seen happen because of their investment and their opportunities that exist, because now they're sitting at the top. So it's a paradigm shift moving from top to bottom. Next slide.
All right, thank you, Herman. I'm going to take over and talk about the city's perspective on this. So as it becomes pretty clear, Herman and his organization are experts in engaging, talking to, and establishing those relationships with the community. So if a city wants to be honest with itself, it needs to know what its capabilities are and where its expertise lies. So it has to be honest with itself. A city and its planning department can do a lot related to those level of expertise. It can manage projects and a wide range of projects. That's projects from contemplation of what land uses should go where and if they should be changed and how those development standards should change. It's contemplation of where specific corridors should be focused on and where transportation can go. It can also manage the land uses and those subsequent development standards. It can allocate the appropriate resources so when the land uses are decided on and what corridors look to be focused on, that the projects are geared and at capturing that community's vision. But it does not have outreach experts. And that's pretty clear when we have somebody like Herman at the table versus somebody like me. If we want to really establish the relationships with the residents and we want to get a comprehensive community vision, we need to work with the experts that are on the ground doing the work. And the city can do that if it's honest with itself. It can work in and through these organizations in collaboration so that everybody gets moved up. And one of the best ways that we've found to do that is to connect with organizations and CBOs such as Every Neighborhood Partnership, and take it even a step further and actually contract with them. So utilize and ensure that those organizations that are there developing those relationships with the residents have every resource they need to continue and to stay in formation so the city can continue to work in that partnership. So for reference, we have multiple contracts with community-based organizations throughout the city of Fresno on active planning projects to get their assistance through outreach, and that's done through them. Now I'm going to go through some case studies to show you guys how we've done that in action, so how we built it in action. Then we're going to go through 3 case studies, as Herman talked about, in Fresno. All of these are related to EPA brownfield projects that we have, either closely tied or directly related. So I'm going to start with the temporary plaza that was created on a catalyst site of a brownfields project. It's located in Fresno, just so everybody's aware, for Fresno, California. Fresno's almost the direct center of California. It's the 5th largest city in the state of California. And as everybody knows, California is one of the largest states in the nation. We're also right in the middle of the Central Valley, which the Central Valley is responsible for a fair amount of not only the US's fruits and vegetables, but also worldwide. So there's probably fruits and vegetables that you eat on a daily basis, and you may not have been aware, but it came from the Central Valley in and around Fresno, California. So in that, we have several neighborhoods that we work in, and not unlike a lot of places, we have several communities that are disadvantaged and have been forgotten over time. And we're going to get into the specifics of this project, the Elm Avenue Revitalization Strategy, but I wanted to start and touch on an action that was related and at the same time separate of the project. So it's a conversion of a vacant property on a catalyst site for the Elm Avenue Revitalization Strategy, which was run through an EPA Brownfields area-wide planning grant, as well as donations. So, and the why we did this is, we started the visioning process. We wanted to early activation, and we heard a community need. And just for framing, for some demographics, I want to showcase one, that the families in this area where the plaza was developed, 83% of them have children, and 38% of Fresno-wide households have children. So there's a lot of families here, and they're on the lower end of the economic spectrum. And this is also one of the most park deficient areas in town, one of the largest food deserts we have in town, or I think has recently been stated, food apartheids in town. And it's an area that needs some focus and amenities. So we started this process, and this was kind of the shift. And I'm going to let Herman talks about how they conduct outreach in this neighborhood. We heard directly from community organizations and activists that the best way to connect with the community and talk with the community is go to where they are. Listen to the people who are actively involved in the neighborhood. And I'd say this was one of the first projects the City of Fresno and our planning department utilized to work through CBOs, to go to where people were and to listen to the residents and learn how we could actually engage them. So I'm going to allow Herman to talk about some of the way they engage in this community.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Yeah, exactly right. So I remember when Drew asked us if we had any interest in a partnership along with the lines of the Elm Plaza, and it turned out that we had existing spaces through our community organizing work in elementary schools, at farmers markets, various community meetings. Community centers would host workshops and webinars. So it was an easy alignment between what the city was hoping to champion, along to coexist with community members to have a shared vision of their neighborhood. So what you see on the picture there is Drew's team come alongside of our existing spaces of farmer markets. We had a charrette series, having residents interact with some of the designs, having folks vote on some of the amenities, help to prioritize which of the scope of work makes sense in their neighborhood. So really an active feedback loop in about 5, 6, 7 different spaces in one geography, where this was really being centered as a focus area for this project. So I think we did a great job of trying to find the parallels and trying to find the synergy between the bigger vision and also making sure that community's voice is actively involved in the planning process.
Thank you. So what's the project itself? It lies on a 3.14 acre campus for one of the most fundamental churches in Southwest Fresno. that is the St. Res Baptist Church. And we were going through this visioning process, both with the residents and the church at the same time, and together through every neighborhood partnerships, Herman and his team, and thinking what's the long-term vision for this campus. So as you can see of that aerial image, that's the campus itself. And then the example site design there showed what it could potentially become. So we worked with our consultants, and they came up with a draft concept of how can you turn this corridor and this catalytic site into something that the community desires and envisions. So that's a mixed-use building on the corner, because again, there's a lack of retail, there's a lack of grocery stores. Just a quick side note, there was a high school group that conducted a study for a business class to see what would be the most successful business in Southwest Fresno. They identified a coffee shop. When they went to look for a appropriate space where that coffee shop could be housed, they found that there were 0 vacant square feet in Southwest Fresno. And not only was there 0 vacant square feet, there were 0 square feet period in Southwest Fresno if a tenant was to move out. This is an area that is one of the most prominent areas in Fresno. So we heard there was definitely a need. And the residents weren't necessarily wanting to wait. Their desire was to have something now, something they could touch, something they could have access to, and they wanted to be involved in the process. So we realized that development does take time, but community action shouldn't. So we had a resource, which was our partner in St. Res Baptist Church, and a army of residents through community organizations. And throughout the process, we heard from a lot of residents that they wanted community space, they wanted park, they wanted complete streets, they wanted just access to services. And we wanted to provide this, and we were told by a couple different consultants throughout this process, as well as folks directly like Herman, is it's as easy as taking a site and making it something that's an asset for the community. So we started asking around, where can this asset go? Where should it go? How should it work? And the church said, look no further. We have a perfect asset. We have a vacant lot that's been sitting for a long time that we put a fence around. All we use it as is a parking lot. And if there's an idea, we can use it. So let's come up with an idea. So we said, here's what we heard. We heard that a park is needed, and a lot of people want a park. We heard that people want just a pretty space to walk on. So complete streets, as recognized, I'm sure in Germany as well, is just all the amenities you want on a street. A comfortable, safe environment has good lighting, good trees, places to stop, and businesses to go to. They just wanted improvements generally in their area. They also said they did want housing. They wanted community serving retail, and they wanted grocery stores. So in listening to the community, listening to the church, we said, what if we just temporarily did it? This development's going to take a long time. We're going to work towards getting those resources, but what if we turn this site that we have a active participant in a planning process who's willing to give it up to be used as a community resource? What if we turned it into a plaza? And that's what we did. So we used the consultants to come up with the conceptual design, and then the project team went to work. So really on the ground in Fresno, of working with residents to get an immense amount of donation of time and energy and resources. So just to put the numbers out there, we had over 1,000 or 2,000 hours of time dedicated. So just for point of reference, in the United States, a full-time employee is 2,080 hours. So in under 3 months, we had over a full-time employee working on this site. We had over $90,000 in kind or time and material donations from a variety of different vendors and resources. And we had over 200 people come out for 2 community build days to develop this. And I can't say that I brought those people out there. It wasn't me. It was Herman, his team, and people in the organization. So I'm going to kind of let him speak to how people were engaged and encouraged to come out.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. So, I mean, this is a very unique opportunity, right? How oftentimes in the planning process do community members actually get to be part of the construction phase, the preliminary phases of the bigger vision of the development? So this is very exciting. To be honest, it was a very hard push as we're organizing residents to mobilize them for this project to get them on board and get excited. This was actually a great opportunity for them to champion this project, but also take a sense of ownership of this project by getting their hands dirty, by coming out with their families to do a build day, building a farmer's market stand, of shoveling the dirt, moving dirt around. These are all great analogies of how things happen in a community. But I think really it was just being able to identify with a space for the greater need of the community, but also participating in it actively, being an active role in the creation process. The co-creation process was a very exciting opportunity that we leveraged for momentum afterwards to activate the space afterwards. So really strategically was we're not inviting folks just for the construction phase of it, but we're inviting folks to activate it afterwards. So they're getting to see how it's being developed, but also their appetite's being whet to see how can we now sustain this activity, this space for activation and to create more activities to really champion this space to become a key asset in our neighborhoods.
And speaking of, this is what it's become. So as you can see here, we have a usable space. There's a stage, as Herman mentioned. We got a concession stand. There's a mural on the entrance. There's a green space in one of the corners, and as you can see there along those purple and the purple and gold, it's not reference to the Los Angeles Lakers. That is the color of the church. There's also a spot for people to sit. So we went around to the community and we asked what resources were available. So just in terms of creativity, a local resident came to me one day and said, hey, there's a lot of pallet companies in here. I bet there's something you can do with those. So we went to the pallet companies and asked them if we could use their pallets, and they donated hundreds of pallets, and that's what those benches are made out of. It's stacked pallets put on top of each other. But as you can see in the picture in the bottom right, it's a perfect opportunity for people to sit, stand, eat, hang out. We've hosted several farmers markets there. There's been fundraiser events that have happened there. The church has an annual event called Rest Fest, and they host it on this site. So it's become an asset for the residents. Obviously, through COVID, it's made it difficult to use, but it's something that their Economic Development Corporation executive director is actively working on creating that. Also, it should be known that we said, obviously development takes time. So this started back in 2017, 2018. So the community, took the time to do it, and now development is actually occurring. So because they've brought residents out there, because they showcased that they had the ability to utilize their space efficiently, it got the attention of not just community members, but community organizations and investors. And they've partnered with other organizations, and they received up to over $3 million in grant funding to convert a building that was vacant that they were using as a distribution hub or a food storage for food donations that they hand out every week. So it's going to become a regional hub where millions of pounds of food is going to be distributed through there. And there's going to be a brand new building built right next door to it. This is on the south side of the plaza. And the new building is going to house a commercial kitchen, office space for entrepreneurs, and a staff of 3 or 4 that the church is bringing on to make sure that residents have access to food, residents have access to healthy cooking, residents have access to entrepreneurial opportunities, and there's going to be business and social services in there as well. So this has directly led to physical new development that's occurred along with an existing asset. So we dove in deep to that plaza, but how we got there in the first place, we're going to pull back now of how we got there, and that was through the Elm Avenue revitalization strategy. So Elm Avenue revitalization strategy was done through an EPA Brownfields area-wide planning grant. And this was received by the city in 2015, and we had to wait to really conduct this work till a couple years later, because there was an ongoing planning effort in and around this project area that was going to dictate how how land uses and the land was going to be used and changed over time. As you can see here, a area-wide planning grant is to work towards implementation. The EPA's objective is to take this and figure out how do you create direct implementation strategies to get towards implementation. So we kind of have built it as a roadmap to development. So as you can see here, it's stage 1 and kind of casting that vision of how do we move forward? How do we establish where we need to go to build, or what we want to build, excuse me. Where are we going to get the funding resources and how it will actually be built? So the project area, one thing I want to note, just visually, I know brownfields, as described by the EPA, are either proven or perceived to be contaminated sites that inhibits development. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're always vacant land, but the one thing that's glaring of the aerial map for the project area is the amount of vacant land there is there. This is one of the oldest, most established neighborhoods within the city of Fresno, and if I was to show you an aerial map of the same size somewhere else within our city, you would not see that much vacant land. And so this is the project area. You can see we identified several catalyst sites. Those are outlined in both of the aerial and the other map, on the figure ground map. And we had three sites. One was the St. Rest Church. One was another one just to the south of it, the church in Elm, and the last one was on North and Elm. And just so everybody's aware, this is one of the most vital historic corridors in Fresno. It also is one of the worst stories in terms of what's happened with bad planning practices within the United States. So it went through a immense amount of redlining. It also went through a lot of urban renewal. And if people aren't aware, redlining was areas that were identified by the banks and as well as cities where people of color were not allowed, or were the areas in which people of color were not allowed to buy houses. So if an area was redlined, it was red, as this is the only area in which a person of color is allowed to buy a house. It's also areas where cities did not invest appropriate amount of resources, and it allowed areas to deteriorate. Subsequently, we went through a process called urban renewal, where it was billed as something that was going to benefit some of these areas. Really what it did is it took a lot of valuable resources from these areas and shifted it to other parts of town. So this area also definitely was affected by that. And it also was affected by some, either direct or indirect environmental racism through the concentration of industrial uses in and around this area, which has caused the residents on average to live 20 years less than the other residents of Fresno who live about 5 miles north. That's 20 years less of life on average for the residents. So it's definitely something stark. To get into some more of some of the demographics I brought back up, again, it's a family-oriented area. It's a very diverse area, right? So there's a large Hispanic population there. It's the largest African-American Black area in Fresno. It's historically known as a diverse area in town. It's well connected. The best way to get the word out in this neighborhood is to send a text to local leaders. It will then go to other people and word of mouth. You have to utilize the existing chains to go there. As you can see, the average income in this area is almost half of what it is citywide and countywide. There definitely is a small percentage of people that's also due to the lack of investment in that area. There's been very limited housing that's been built in there of any type. There's almost been no market rate single family housing built there. It's predominantly been apartment buildings that have been built there, which I think we need a diverse set of housing stocks, but there is no opportunity for people for upward mobility to stay in their neighborhood if they would like to. And obviously, because there is a concentration of poverty, the one thing that Fresno, and I don't know if it's unique nationwide, but there still is money there. There just isn't a lot of rooftops, and a lot of development is based off of rooftops, not necessarily on the money that actually exists there. And this is due to residents living together. So this is in 2015 dollars, but there's an average, and the grocery number isn't there. If you just take the dollars spent for health, clothing, general merchandise, and restaurants, there's almost over $40 million that leaves that neighborhood on a yearly basis and is spent somewhere else. If you add in groceries, that number is an additional $30 million. So roughly $70 million leaves this neighborhood on a yearly basis and is spent somewhere else. That means their tax dollars leaves and is invested somewhere else. That means jobs are somewhere else, but it also means they have to get somewhere else, which means it's difficult for them to travel. I think this is pretty obvious now of why we wanted a plaza, even if it was temporary, that allowed for a farmer's market to be developed, because getting groceries in this area is incredibly difficult, especially if you don't have a car and your only form of transportation is walking or the bus, and it can take you up to an hour to get to the nearest grocery store. And this is also why we wanted to focus this plan on finding those key sites where development could occur. So I'm going to start and talk about
Drew,
what we did.
just want to jump in for a minute and do a
Yeah.
quick time check.
Oh, okay.
Our webinar, we have about 13 minutes left in the webinar.
Oh.
So I don't see a lot of questions coming in, so you can keep going, but I just wanted to let you know, because I know there's several things you still want to chat about. So
thank you. All right, I'll push through quick. So we had lots of workshops, and as Herman had mentioned, we had 2-day charrettes, but really the key was integrating into those existing meetings. So we met with residents at 15 existing meetings to collect all this information. We had our material in multiple languages. We had interpreters there. And the one thing that I was told by Herman early on is just come prepared, come with food or drinks, you know, essence before form, get to know people. So at all these meetings, I would bring coffee, or I'd bring pastries or some sort of breakfast item to make sure that I could connect with the residents. And there was some of the most detailed conversations in terms of how the corridor should be developed was around a table with 5 or 6 community members who all of a sudden it became grossly obvious that they were planning experts themselves. And really everybody is a planning expert in their own community if you just stop and listen. So I'm going to push through. So what we ended up coming up with was a playbook. So we had a playbook, and we kind of shifted the way that we conducted our final product, our deliverable, is we created a playbook that was usable for everybody. So we made something that local governments could use, and this symbology here is throughout this entire document. So if you're a local government, a community member, a property owner, a developer, a regulatory agency, or environmental professional, you knew exactly what was geared towards what you needed to work on. And we use this document today in the coalition that we formed. So this document was kind of set the groundwork for one, how do we engage appropriately, and how do we create documents and processes that are useful for the entire community. So I'm going to breeze through the coalition of what we do, and then I'll let Herman talk about how we're utilizing the coalition to further engage. So the City of Fresno received a community-wide assessment grant, and we decided that we wanted to pair it alongside a ongoing project that we had, which is called the TCC, Transformative Climate Communities, where the city received $66.5 million through the state of California, and it needed to focus on downtown Chinatown and parts of Southwest Fresno. So we saw a lot of organizations that were working in this area, and we felt that it was relevant for us to focus our attention on this area. So projects that weren't considered as part of this funding package of that $66.5 million, we wanted to be a resource that could further push those along, provide any gap funding that was needed for sites, studies or assessment, as well as outreach and conceptual design concepts. So we formed a coalition, and this coalition means that we work together as a group. It's a City of Fresno, it's a Chinatown Foundation, it's Fresno County, it's the St. Res Economic Development Corporation, Every Neighborhood Partnership, Fresno Housing, Fresno Metro Ministry, and we are growing. And we meet on a monthly basis, and we talk about what's going on, what projects are working, where support is needed, and how the grant could work. And we collectively vote on how we're going to spend the dollars for grant activities that's going to go towards furthering the ongoing objectives of these organizations that are happening in the City of Fresno, really through the organizations that are on the ground working, such as Every Neighborhood Partnership. And like I said before, we're in partnership and we're in contract with Every Neighborhood Partnership to do the outreach. It's not us that needs to do it. It's Every Neighborhood Partnership who's on the ground working in all 3 of these neighborhoods to develop these integral relationships with the community members to make sure we're working in the right direction. So our role is to make sure that we're looking at current projects or programs in the project area. And then we want to establish a guide to grant activities. So how are we going to guide these grant activities? How are we going to guide where the dollars are going to be spent to make sure they're making a substantial change? And then we want to create a lasting program is really what we want to do. We want to make sure that this isn't the first grant we get. It's not the only grant we get, excuse me, and the City of Fresno is not the only one that gets a grant. So here's just how we look to be moving forward is we have 3 sub areas, and we meet on a monthly basis as a coalition and with the 3 sub areas. We look at what the community goals are, and really that comes from the organizations that were listed on the coalition. And we look for partners that we can bring in. So just for reference, in Chinatown, we're bringing in high-speed rail, which is, California is building the first high-speed rail system in the United States, and Fresno is the first stop that's going to be constructed. we want to make sure we're aligning funding. So where are we dedicating these dollars to be spent appropriately? And then how are we identifying potential projects that can be developed and provided with the appropriate resources to be developed and are in complement and unison with what's actively happening in the city. And that means we have been relatively successful even in the short period of time that we've developed. We've been a coalition for just over a year, but dollars have been received. So Herman, you want to talk about some of the additional grants we've received?
Yeah. So in addition to some of the seed money from the original EPA assessment grant that we were part of as well, we've been able to successfully leverage existing EPA dollars. For example, our organization got $75,000 from the EJ grant to do some community health access and community gardens. So, as Drew mentioned, this is a food apartheid. Food disparities exist all around us. This grant helps us to provide more health access points, provide more wellness activities, and also identify land uses that we can do redevelopment for community gardens, with the hopes of also eliminating the carbon footprint, like the gas emissions that exist in those communities, which in the area of Southwest Fresno is probably the poorest air quality in our city. So all this aligns with an EPA vision. We're looking for dollars to continue researching for the dollars to continue to leverage and build off what's existing in these communities by reinvesting and back into Southwest Fresno. Our partner at Fresno Metro Ministries also received $500,000 on our Better Blackstone Corridor project to continuing on this idea of economic TOD work in the neighborhood to continue building stronger roads, infrastructure, and complete streets.
Yeah, and one of the partners, Fresno Housing, it's got some technical assistance to do early site activation. So as we mentioned from the Plaza, they have a project that looks to be developed over the next 5 to 6 years. And so they want to activate their site, the site where that project will go. They want to house farmers markets. It's in the same neighborhood nearby where the Plaza, the St. Res Plaza is. And they want to use that as a model and make a resource for the community, a spot where people can go, where farmers markets occur, where community events could occur. And then the city of Fresno has a revolving loan fund that we use for remediation, and we received an additional $1 million. And this is through working with the coalition to identify sites where remediation may need to occur. And we definitely have a need for a fair amount of remediation in Southwest Fresno and city as a whole. So some lessons learned, I'll just touch on a couple. Be willing to know what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and be willing to work with those who can complement your weaknesses, and be willing to listen. And the best thing you can do is stop talking and open your ears and listen to the community members to really get an understanding of what their needs are, so that you can focus your time and make sure it's something of value for not just the city, but for the residents. Because as a civil servant, that's our job, is to work for the residents.
Yeah, and as far as on the community-based organization side, the investment pays off. So, for example, before COVID, we invested a lot of time, energy, resources, salary time, investment in resident leadership programming, cohorts, development, engagement. When COVID happened, we were able to tap into those existing networks of folks that we had built trust with, which went a long way. So. Don't cheat yourself. Any engagement you do now is worth later. You can never anticipate in a pandemic, a crisis that we all went through, but it does pay off when you do robust engagement, because folks will stay around. Folks will have the capacity to coexist with you for planning and for strategic growth in communities.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. That was really great. Really appreciate that, Herman and Drew. We have a couple minutes left in our webinar. So there's a question in the chat, which we'll get to, but I wanted to just make the comment that takeaways from me: development takes time, but community action shouldn't. I think it's a really wonderful tagline and an important, approach to all of this, and something that others can do. And also, Herman, you mentioned at one point about how you were engaging the communities in 5, 6, or 7 different spaces, but all in the same neighborhood, and really getting out there and finding people. So one of the questions I have for both of you is just, how did you identify which groups to work with? So what was that process like?
Yeah, I don't think it was that strategic, to be honest. Oftentimes, so it's the pre-work that happens, right? So if I'm organizing with a group of residents to identify issues, concerns that they're motivated by to do some social change in their built environments, I'm already have folks engaged in that process. So whether if it's a low tier of level of engagement, or a higher tier of activism, we're inviting city partners who have planning into the process. That's an easy on-ramp. It's not very difficult necessarily to identify a, a group of folks, targeted audience necessarily. It doesn't really happen oftentimes, unfortunately, here in Fresno. It's more, here's an existing group of folks who are engaged with a partner they are trusted with, and we invite other partners to come and coexist in that space, to share the space, to share out other opportunities. So I don't really have a really defined answer for you other than as long as you're engaging folks and you have a level of trust, it's a lot easier to introduce new ideas and new opportunities.
Great. And then speaking of trust, one of the questions in the chat was just for the city, how did you approach property owners along Elm Avenue about the sites and to kind of overcome whether there was any mistrust?
Yeah, so I think honesty is key. Recognizing what had happened in the past and putting that on the table up front was absolutely crucial to gaining some of that trust, and then understanding that trust doesn't happen overnight. It's showing up continuously, answering the questions, and if you don't know how to answer them, finding the resources. The um, One of the Catalyst site members, property owners, was actively engaged and involved, but they're also, a service provider for Fresno, and so it's a business that does some of our trash collection. So they knew how the city worked. The other one was the church, and not just was the pastor, but most of the congregation members, they didn't have trust in the city because there had been activities in the past that caused them to not gain trust, or to lose and erode that trust. So really, it was meeting with them continuously and offering them every resources we can, taking the time to explain it. And church systems oftentimes are like government systems. They have boards of leaders. They have groups who get together and have conversations on different topics and subjects. So I went to the leaders group, I went to the deacons group, I went to the family group, I went to the kids group, I went to all of them and gave the same conversation or answered the same questions and gave the same presentation to talk to them, to talk about how we'd like them to be involved and what we expected of them. And also to find the resources and not put anything on them, right? They give and they give and they give. So we said, it's our turn to help and not assume that you're going to take on a brunt of the load. So I'd say time and consistency.
Super. Carl, can I ask one more question before you close us out?
Yes, of course,
I know
gladly.
we're running long. Okay, good. Yes, another one that came in the chat, and I think it's really interesting. It speaks to the children and children's activities and planning for that. Do you think that's a really critical element, that there's some kind of youth or design aimed to children in order to attract and keep interest, especially as you're building public spaces for them? So I modified the question a little bit, but I think that's what we're getting at.
Yeah, I think so. I think getting young adults, students involved in the planning process is crucial for the shift that needs to happen when their parents get older, become seniors, and the kids become adults, and they have a sense of community pride that's been built in because they were involved in early stages of development. So, for example, if I'm in the classroom and I'm trying to get feedback or some designs from kids, I'm doing activities with paper and color markers, and I'm having kids to help draw up their dream playground. Here's a map of the area. Draw or write what you like to see in this area. And so getting kids activated early to get feedback, I to me, it's probably the most sweet moments of my organizing work, because you see kids with all the creativity happen there, and then super excited about it. And then they tell their parents, and the parents come to the build days, and they see what's happening. Again, so it's a really much of a domino effect, getting kids involved and parents involved, these families are involved, who can then activate the space. And that's the goal, right? So redevelopment is not just for the sake of redevelopment, it's to how do we move and shift the dynamic in these neighborhoods where they can actually activate the space on a daily basis, and that becomes actually an effective model. Otherwise, it becomes just another project that's not being utilized at all.
Thank you so much. I will turn this back over to Carl, but I did want to say that a couple other things, food for thought for folks. Quotes I got from your presentation, that everyone is a planning expert in their own neighborhood, and that is to be valued, and that the robust engagement now will pay off later. So those are a few really key things that thank you for sharing with us. Herman Quiones and Drew Wilson, thank you so much for doing this and sharing your experiences with us. I will turn things back to Carl to close us up.
Okay, perfect. Also from my side, thank you very much for the very practical examples from which I think personally German stakeholders could also learn. And one of the quotes that I'm going to take from myself, from my colleagues, is essence before form. Because I have the opinion and the feeling that the German authorities at least focus a lot on form and probably less on essence. And I think that's one way of learning from each other. I just posted a quick link to our newsletter of the DEUS network. If you would like to be informed about our future webinars, please feel free to sign up there. We will take a short summer break before hosting the next webinar somewhere around September is our plan. Again, by signing up to the newsletter, you'll be directly informed about that. The recording of this webinar will be placed on our website as well, so that can be viewed later. And at this point, there's nothing else left for me to do other than to thank you, Amy, for the moderation of the US session, to thank you all, to the presenters for your wonderful input, and hope to see you guys at our next webinar for the series of area-wide planning. So thank you, have a good rest of the day or a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.